Dead or Alive has always been a series known for pushing technical boundaries in the world of fighting games, and with the 6th game in the series making its debut recently, Koei Tecmo looks to continue this trend. Dead or Alive 6 is the first new entry in the series designed for current generation machines, using a brand new graphics engine to boot. There's a lot of new visual features to enjoy, but at the same time there are some surprising technical hiccups for those playing on consoles. Thus today we're going to take a look at every single version of DOA 6, putting them all to the test. What sort of visuals can you expect from this new engine? How does it look and run on each machine? And how about that PC version? Ready to find out? Let the battle begin. For many, Dead or Alive 2 is the point when people were first introduced to Team Ninja's DOA series. At the time, this Naomi-powered arcade game redefined what people expected from a high-end fighting game, and when it finally arrived in early 2000 on Sega Dreamcast, it stood as the most impressive-looking home fighting game yet, at least on a technical level. Sporting super high polygon characters, and impressively massive stages with transitions between different sections, Dead or Alive 2 was a technical showpiece for the system, and it helped put Team Ninja on the map. But it's been years since the last numbered game in the series. Dead or Alive 5 was released nearly 7 years ago after all, first appearing on last generation consoles, so many have wondered, what would a current generation Dead or Alive game look like? Well, we have the answer, and that answer is a tad complex. Dead or Alive 6 offers a suitable leap over previous installments in most areas, and its new engine holds a lot of promise, but there are some harsh limitations present on consoles and some surprising design choices on the visual front. But first, let's talk about resolution. Like most other recent games from Koei Tecmo, DOA 6 offers performance and quality modes across every console. Basically, it comes down to frame rate stability versus visual quality, and how these settings impact the experience varies greatly from system to system. All versions seem to rely on a lower quality post-process anti-aliasing technique though, while texture filtering is on the lower end. So on Xbox One X, the game is advertised as native 4K, and this is true. When using the quality mode, you do get native 4K, but the frame rate takes a massive hit, something we'll examine later in the video. If you want to enjoy DOA 6 at 60 frames per second though, you'll need to engage the performance mode. When using this, the HUD will still render at 4K, but 3D gameplay is dropped to 1080p it seems. I say it seems because every single shot we've counted comes in at 1080p, so it seems unlikely that dynamic resolution is play, but since it's been used in the past, anything is possible. Still, I checked over 30 plus shots here, and it's clear that the effective resolution you'll see during normal gameplay is 1080p. Ps4 Pro is much the same with a maximum resolution of 1080p, but this time it includes all HUD and text elements, no 4K HUD for PS4 Pro owners. There are 2 graphics modes in this version as well, but this doesn't impact resolution. Instead, the quality mode seems to slightly improve AA and slightly improve shading. It's all very subtle, but it's there if you look. Over on the base PS4, you get the same 2 graphical settings. When using the favorite graphics option, you get full 1080p, which compares favorably against the PS4 Pro version. When using performance mode then, the resolution is dropped to 900p. There's always a chance that dynamic resolution is in play here, but every shot that we've counted suggests that it's just a locked 900p on the PS4. The Xbox One S then sits at the bottom. The graphics mode offers 1080p output, but performance takes a massive hit. Then there's the performance mode, and when using it, the Xbox version appears to use dynamic resolution varying between 720p and 900p, which unfortunately is not enough to save it, as we'll see later. Due to the inclusion of dynamic res on Xbox One S then, there's always a possibility that other versions could use it as well, but it was never evident in our testing. Whereas on Xbox One, it was pretty obvious right from the start. The PC version, of course, includes support for higher resolutions, but in my case, it only seems to run in borderless window mode even when selecting the full screen option. It does look nice and sharp, of course, at native 4K, just like Xbox One X, but thankfully, a powerful PC can blitz through with smoother performance overall. Overall then, it's acceptable enough in terms of image quality, but not especially amazing. It does kind of feel like X and Pro could have supported a slightly higher resolution while still holding 60 frames per second, but I guess we'll never know. Of course, there is one other odd thing to mention. HDR is available in this game, but only on Xbox consoles. That's right, PC and PS4 owners are left without the feature entirely, which is a little puzzling. Oh, and on top of everything else, the story mode relies heavily on lower resolution FMV sequences, which look out of place when playing on a PC in high resolutions. To be fair though, this issue is present in most fighting games with story sequences I've found, but it stands out more than usual here due to severe aliasing and compression artifacts during certain sequences. Thankfully, while image quality is not a strong point for the game, the rest of the presentation is excellent. The roster has been updated for DOA 6, character faces are more detailed than ever with new skin shading, improved modeling, enhanced hair rendering, and even a nice sweat shader. Most characters look great in action, and I appreciate the high poly look most characters go for. Of course, not every character looks perfect, mind you. Janli's hair, for instance, struck me as a bit off. Still, the results are great overall. Costumes are also more ornate this time with higher resolution textures and plenty of moving pieces. The overall look and style is slightly more realistic overall, though it's still rather doll-like, which I suppose is the series' signature style. In comparison to Dead or Alive 5, some characters wind up looking pretty similar. Rig looks a touch better here in DOA 6, but the difference is not significant. Ryu, on the other hand, is more detailed in the new game with his default costume, and this scene showcases the more vibrant lighting and shadowing. That said, the polygon count is definitely increased here, and it's especially noticeable in facial features that you see during the close-ups. From the normal gameplay angle at 1080p, the differences are hard to spot, but they're definitely there, and it's a game that works extremely well at 4K resolution. I will say that while the textures on the costumes are certainly sharp, I am a touch disappointed by the materials themselves. Surfaces lack the depth that you would expect with modern physically based rendering, lending the game a somewhat retro aesthetic, I suppose. Cloth, for instance, is lacking Fresnel that was evident in other fighting games such as Soul Calibur 6. The light doesn't really roll off the cloth in a realistic manner. In fact, compared to something like Soul Calibur 6, DOA 6 doesn't feel quite as modern to me. The character detail is similar, but the materials and lighting in Soul Calibur are a lot more impressive overall. But at the same time, I kind of feel that's okay in this case. Dead or Alive 6 is clearly following an artistic path rooted in the previous games, and it works well on its own terms. I love the way it looks, especially running at 4K 60 on the PC. This is a style that demands pristine image quality. Stages are an interesting beast then. There are plenty of stages here and they all look mostly great, but again, materials feel somewhat dated and on consoles there's a lot of shimmering. The water in this stage also isn't great looking, yet if we go over to this stage instead, the game is gorgeous. I appreciate how in DOA Arena there's also this impression of sun bouncing off the ground with a subtle bloom effect around the character's legs. I'm not entirely sure how this is achieved, to be honest, but it works really well. The transitions between different areas have also returned, increasing the effective size and shape of several stages in the game, though I do wish there were more stages overall. And there are even a couple areas that have seemingly returned from DOA 5, and this comparison highlights that while very similar, Dead or Alive 6 sports improved lighting and increased scene detail. So visually, the game is good, but not necessarily mind-blowing. It doesn't quite reach the same heights of previous Dead or Alive games prior to 5, which I feel represented the state of the art at time of release. But that doesn't mean it's not a great-looking game or a nice boost over Dead or Alive 5. The only other nitpick I could aim at the game is tied to loading. The loading times between matches are the longest yet for a DOA game on consoles. This was a huge feature back in DOA 2 on the Dreamcast, and it would follow over on the Xbox. Basically, the game could instantly jump between different arenas after the initial load. As the series progressed though, this became less possible due to increased data size, and with DOA 6 the time between matches has increased. This is not really a problem on the PC, thankfully, but in all cases I feel that a versus screen before each match could have helped, something to pad out the loading times and add a touch of flair to the action. So visually speaking then, the PC version is clearly the version to play. It's a little strange for me to jump over to the PC for a fighting game though, I have to admit, but it manages to work quite well. Playing at a locked 4K 60 with super quick loading times makes for a great experience. The image quality really brings out the detail and it just feels great. The only issue with this port is that there are not a lot of options here and not a lot of support for advanced PC features. You basically get some toggles between shadow and object detail, and that's about it. It's really as basic a port as they come in that sense. And for those curious, here's how the game looks both with all settings enabled and all settings disabled. And as you can see, the game looks a lot worse with shadows disabled. Thus, unless you're really struggling with performance, I would recommend leaving all these settings enabled, though you can at least dial them down just a tad if you need to. And while we're here, here's how the Xbox One X stacks up against the PC version. I'm using the X's high resolution mode here, which is not how you'd normally want to play of course, but it gives you an idea of the difference between the two. It's pretty much the same. You may also have noticed that the Xbox One versions of the game look slightly darker than all the other versions. This seems to be the result of the same black level bug that we've noticed in other recent videos. The Xbox is outputting an image with higher contrast for some reason, which is not the way it should be. It's also worth noting that there are a few extra visual features on the Pro and the X compared to the base systems, namely things like foliage here in the background and other such details throughout the game. Now, of course, the key to any fighting game is hitting that sweet spot in terms of performance, and that means 60 frames per second. This is what it's all about, and DOA 6 mostly makes good on this on consoles, provided you use the right mode. So let's start at the top then, Xbox One X. The game defaults to performance mode, which is 1080p, and it lives up to its billing. The frame rate is basically locked to 60 frames per second with no dips or skips to speak of. This is exactly what you want from a fighting game, and it plays great. Now, switch over to native 4K and you get this instead. A frame rate that varies primarily between 35 to 40 frames per second. It feels remarkably jerky to play and is not how I would suggest enjoying the game. We even tested this on a FreeSync monitor with a super wide range between 30 all the way up to 144 Hz, and even there the illusion just didn't work. The game is not smooth in action. So my thinking on this setting then is that it's basically future-proofing the game. This is the kind of option that could really thrive on the next generation Xbox, provided it continues to offer backwards compatibility, and there's no reason to think it won't. The next Xbox should easily be able to hit 4K 60 when that system inevitably appears, and we'll be sure to test it at the time, but for now, you'll want to stick to 1080p. So how about PS4 Pro? Well, the Pro turns in great performance all around. It too offers a performance mode and a quality mode of course, but the difference between the two is extremely subtle. Thus, it should be no surprise that both turn in nearly identical performance when playing with the same fight. There may be one or two additional dropped frames when using the quality mode, but it's also possible that it's just a fluke. This one is solid no matter which mode you choose to play with, which is good. The base PS4 though is a different story. The quality mode delivers PS4 Pro quality visuals at 1080p, while performance drops to 900p, and as you can see, this means much smoother performance overall. That's not to say it's quite perfect. Even at 900p, certain attacks can still dip the frame rate, but these are typically of the cinematic variety and don't intrude on actual gameplay. Still, it's disappointing that a series known for rock-solid performance can't deliver this 100% of the time here, especially since base PS4 often seems to be used for tournaments. Things get a whole lot worse on the Xbox One S though. First there's the 1080p mode, and well, you can kind of see the problem I think. Not only does performance dip way below 60 frames per second, it's less fluid than the native 4K mode on Xbox One X. The poor Xbox One just can't pull this off at 60 FPS while rendering at 1080p, even dipping below 30 frames per second at points. So yeah, it's rather awful and I would not recommend using this mode at all on Xbox One S or a base system. Thankfully, dropping the resolution does greatly improve things overall, and you get a much more consistent 60 frames per second during battle. And it really is mostly 60 frames per second. But I say mostly because that's not necessarily true in all arenas. You see, the problem here is that there are still areas where the frame rate drops like a stone even when using the lower resolution mode. It seems that dynamic res is not enough to save the frame rate in this game, and the Xbox One just can't handle it. Honestly, this is another game on the list of titles that falls short on the original Xbox One, or I guess in this case the Xbox One S, which is kind of a shame in this case considering the series' Xbox legacy. This just isn't good enough for a competitive fighting game. But that's really performance in a nutshell. It's solid on Pro and X when using 1080p, but the base systems can't quite deliver a completely locked experience even when using the lower settings. Of course, there's also PC. Unfortunately, I don't have a mid or low end PC here for testing, so I'm using a higher end machine, one with an RTX 2080 Ti and a 7900X 10-core i9 CPU. As you would expect, it's pretty much a locked 60 frames per second, and of course it looks great. This seems to be the version Koei Tecmo showed off in many of its events as well, and it's rather obvious when you see it in motion. It's the sharpest and smoothest version of the game by far. Lastly, I wanted to quickly mention input latency. Fighting games demand fast input response, but in its current form, DOA 6 is not among the fastest. In fact, it seems to sit somewhere around 7 to 8 frames of lag right now, which isn't great. In fact, it's one of the slowest fighters available today, unfortunately. It still feels good to play, but it could definitely be faster. Here's hoping for a patch. So with all that in mind then, let's quickly recap our options then. If you're playing on consoles and looking for the best experience, then Xbox One X and PS4 Pro will deliver you that stable 60 frames per second action, at 1080p of course. Image quality is a tad rough, but performance is great and the games play as they should. The base PlayStation 4 version then isn't bad, but it still has some dips here and there where I feel it should not, and image quality takes even more of a hit. The older Xbox One though is just a mess in this game, and honestly I cannot recommend playing DOA 6 on an original Xbox One unless you just don't care about frame rate at all. The Xbox One is unfortunately DOA. Of course, if you're cool with using the PC for your fighting game needs, then look no further than the PC version, which offers the sharpest, smoothest visuals of the bunch. Of course, this comes with the caveat that I was not able to test on lower end machines, so your mileage may vary there. After spending the week playing the game then, I feel that DOA 6 is a solid, worthy sequel. It looks great, it plays great, and has plenty of features. The quest and story modes are great for single player action, and of course it's still classic DOA. The only real eye-opening thing in here that I do not like is the insanely expensive season pass. It's not my kind of thing, mind you, but for those that do care, charging nearly $100 for a bunch of costumes and a couple new characters is just an awful value. It's a bad deal all around. Thankfully, you can safely ignore this and still have a great time with the game. And really, that's DOA 6 in a nutshell, or at least my perspective on it. And it's also the end of this video, so if you enjoyed it, be sure to let me know by liking, subscribing, ringing the notification bell, and following us over on Twitter. And until next time, keep on fighting.
Ps4 失敗だったと聞いたわ。
お前何を知っている？イプシロンとは何のことだ？
コントロールは解けてるようだ。行くわよ。はっ きるために。偽物、よくも。すごいわね、ここまで来るなんて。